kind enough to stop by, put his phone down for 2 seconds to hang with us, to talk about what went down over the weekend, what's happening right now, is the creator of Pro Football Talk and the man himself, editor-in-chief of Pro Football Talk as well, Mike Florio. Good to see you, Mike. How are you, brother?
Good, Rich. I think there's something wrong with my phone today, though. For whatever reason, I can't get my Twitter app to come up. I guess I need to.
Yeah, that's odd.
I guess I need to get a new phone.
I don't know. Have you been doged out of the business, Mike? I don't know. You could have.
Somebody took a chainsaw to my phone, Rich.
I don't know. You might be rehired by the end of the conversation, so just don't worry about it. Hey, listen, Mike. What went down with Myles Garrett? Best you can tell over the weekend.
I think the Browns have a very bad habit of attempting to solve problems by throwing money at them. And I don't think that that's a good long-term strategy. Go back to 3 years ago when the Texans approved 4 teams to negotiate directly with Deshaun Watson: the Panthers, Falcons, Saints, and Browns. The Browns were the first team out. They got the shoulder tap first from Deshaun Watson. So what did they do? They rehuddled, refocused, and they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. He still didn't want to go there, but he took the money. And I think that created a poisonous relationship from the get-go. It also helps that he hasn't played well. Fast forward to recently. Garrett wants out. He's made it clear he wants out. I mean, unless this was all some part of a grift to get more money for Myles Garrett, and that's not impossible, but if he truly wanted out and the Browns say, we're not trading you, oh, by the way, here's a giant pile of money, and he says, well, I can't say no to that. How's he going to feel if the Browns stink this year? How's he going to feel if the Browns stink next year when he otherwise would have been closing in on free agency? I don't think this solves anything long term unless they really do turn it around. He's still going to remember once the checks are cashed and he moves on a year or two into this new deal. If he still has regrets about playing for the Browns, it's going to bubble up. And in the interim, you got one of your key leaders, centerpiece of the team, that deep down doesn't want to be there. I don't know that that's good for the Browns.
Yeah. I mean, I guess over the weekend, there must have been a moment where the Jimmy Haslam's door opened up again to a vault, and then I'm just wondering what led to that. Just a decision for the Browns to say, let's make one last run at it, and then top Max. You can't even say top Max Crosby's deal. They blew it out the door, and that's now a second time Jimmy Haslam has reset a market for the rest of his members to figure out how to deal with the aftermath of that. Mike,
and think about this wrinkle too. They gave up 3 first-round picks plus multiple additional draft picks to get Watson. That's part of the cost of that deal that doesn't get discussed very much. What could they have gotten for Garrett? They necessarily gave that up by dumping the money into Garrett now. Whatever they could have gotten via trade, that's gone. And who knows if they even explored it. There were never any reports that they were, but they could have. So it's not just a one-way decision for the Browns to dig deep and throw enough money at the problem to at least solve it in the short term. They gave up whatever they could have gotten in the form of young players, cheap players who can form the nucleus of a long-term team, because unless the Browns know something we don't, they're not going to contend in the remaining years of Myles Garrett's prime. And I think there's going to be regret, maybe both ways. They'll never admit it. They've never admitted any Deshaun Watson regret. They won't admit any regret on keeping Myles Garrett with this giant payday. But this is what dysfunctional teams do. And what the Browns do when there's a problem, they think they can throw enough money at it to solve it. And I just don't think that's a smart way to maintain and build a long-term contender.
Did you ever think you'd see the day where the Steelers pay a wide receiver $33 million a year and cough up a second-round pick to do it?
This is unprecedented. I've been racking my brain to think of a time in the free agency era where the Steelers have paid big money to somebody who wasn't already playing for them. You had the Ben Roethlisberger video earlier. His biggest number ever was $34 million per year in new money on a 2-year deal toward the back end of his tenure with the Steelers. $33 million per year, new money for a stranger to the team. And here's the problem with paying a guy that much money. You better have a plan for getting value out of that guy. The Seahawks never used DK Metcalf the way they could have or should have. The Steelers will need to make DK Metcalf the centerpiece of the offense. to justify the $33 million a year. And you got George Pickens entering a contract year. He's not going to be the first option for a lot of these plays if they design them to go to Metcalfe to justify the contract. Pickens is going to want out. And I wouldn't be surprised if Pickens is gone by the end of the week, because he's got to look at this and say, if I'm going to have a contract year, I'm not going to have it as the second option on a team that's trying to justify a huge contract for Metcalfe. I want to go somewhere else.
Really? You think that he could pull a power play like that and get an exit, become a hostage instead of a volunteer?
Well, and Rich, he's making about 10% this year of what DK Metcalf is making per year in new money. So something's wrong with this picture. They've made it clear that Metcalf is the future. They're never going to pay big money to two receivers, and they're never going to get the ball thrown around unless they really are going to do a full-out Air Coryell approach to their offense, add Aaron Rodgers and throw the ball all over the place. Even then, it's going to be hard for Pickens to have the kind of year that would set him up on the market next year. Now, the problem is if they try to trade him, teams are going to remember that they got a high second-round pick, which essentially became the last pick in round one that year for who's the guy that they got rid of? The receiver, Chase Claypool. And he's not even in the league now. So I think teams are going to tread lightly if the Steelers start calling around to see who wants George Pickens.
Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show. What is going on, do you think, right now in the front offices of Pittsburgh about their quarterback? And how does that involve Seattle with Sam Darnold? I know I'm giving you sort of a big question about the sweepstakes here, but there you have it. What do you think?
Well, from the moment that it became clear to me that Aaron Rodgers no longer wanted to be with the Jets, but he was going to try to get out by needling Woody Johnson every chance he could get so that the Jets would conclude to be the ones who broke up with him instead of the other way around, Pittsburgh made the most sense. And I've been saying for weeks, Pittsburgh makes perfect sense for Aaron Rodgers. He's going to want to end his career, not with a Week 18 regular season game, but with a postseason game at whatever level. You don't want to limp off into the sunset with a loser. And the Steelers have been perennial contenders without him since Ben Roethlisberger really started to tail off. And he stayed 1 year longer at a minimum than he should have. They haven't had good quarterback play, but they've still been relevant, and they've still had non-losing seasons every year of Mike Tomlin's tenure. So I think Rodgers was just waiting. When he reached out to the Giants 2 weeks ago, I think the subtext of that was nobody good wants him. And now the Steelers have finally realized he's our option. I think they've realized because Justin Fields is going to get more from the Jets than the Steelers are willing to pay. So let's just go get Rodgers. Let's transform the team. I mean, this really is a dramatic shift in philosophy for a Steelers team that hasn't won a playoff game since the divisional round in 2016 at Kansas City, the game that got them to realize we need to make a drastic change. They traded up for Patrick Mahomes in the next draft. The Steelers making a drastic change to get back to the playoffs and win a game for the first time in what will be 9 years.
So you think that Rodgers winds up there, or Sam Darnold is going to have a late push where the Steelers are in a bidding war with Seattle right now? Like, again, what's your spidey sense telling you there, Mike?
I can't imagine that John Schneider traded Geno Smith without having a plan to replace him. It's a hell of a gamble at the most important position on the team to say, we'll let Geno go, and then we'll see how the musical chairs game plays out next week. I think they had a plan in place. Now, none of these deals are enforceable. And if there was tampering, it's not like the Seahawks can say, hey, Geno, or hey, Sam, we had our deal, wink, nod, in place last week when it was illegal to even talk to you. So Darnold could go somewhere else if he wants to. The Seahawks could be looking somewhere else. I think there's reason to at least be curious about whether or not the Seahawks might try to trade for someone. Maybe they'll call the Jaguars about Trevor Lawrence. I'm told, remember that weird report from a few weeks ago that the Steelers called the Jaguars about Trevor Lawrence? I'm told it was actually the Seahawks who had called the Jaguars about Trevor Lawrence. And I know the Jaguars have said they're not trading him, but John Schneider basically said that there's no doubt Geno will be their quarterback next year. So one big takeaway from the last few days, whether it's coaches, GMs, owners, players like Myles Garrett, never take anything that anyone says at face value. Everything is subject to change, and anything is possibly a smokescreen for what's really going to happen.
Well, I like the Geno move for the Raiders, right? Last year they got through the draft with nothing, and then the season that we'll deal with it with Gardner, Minshew, and Desmond Ridder and AOC, and they wound up with a complete retool. And this brings stability. And they signed Max Crosby, and the stability that's kind of been their mantra of hiring Pete and getting Geno and keeping Max. I kind of dig what the Raiders have done over the last few weeks.
Well, I mean, they're the fourth place team in the NFC West, and there's a gap. The other three, AFC, excuse me, the other three teams all made it to the playoffs last year. The Raiders have a lot of ground to make up on the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Chargers. And I think Geno ends up being the perfect compromise candidate. After Matthew Stafford decided to stay with the Rams, because we know Tom Brady and company made a big push to try to get Stafford to come to the Raiders, there was this question of they're not enamored with any of the veterans that were available in the front office, John Spytek, the new GM, and Brady, but the coaching staff didn't want to roll the dice on a rookie. I mean, Pete Carroll doesn't want to groom a rookie. He's not going to get another Russell Wilson who comes in and takes him to a Super Bowl in 2 years, and it helps to have the Legion of Boom as well when that happens. So Geno Smith becomes veteran that Pete's familiar with. The front office can get behind it. He's making $25 million this year. No new contract on the way in the door, which is a calculated risk for the Raiders. But all they gave up was a third-round pick. Rich, if we had this conversation a week ago and someone had said, hey, the Seahawks are going to trade DK Metcalf and Geno Smith, and they're going to emerge from it with a second-round and a third-round pick, we would have said, there's no way in hell they're doing that deal. And they did both of them.
I guess, though, when you take a look at the compensation that other teams are getting for their people, second and third's not too shabby for those guys. You know what I mean? Like that's actually the question is how they're going to make them cash in a draft that, you know, where a lot of people are wondering how many stars are in it, right? Like the starters is what Daniel Jeremiah keeps saying about this draft. It's stars. And I guess, you know, a second and a third's not too bad for those guys.
Yeah, in a deep draft with a lot of starters, that's right. But you got to get it right. You got to hit right. You need a guy that you can get on the field. You need to be able to turn that draft pick into a player. And we saw this a few years ago when we saw the Mike Vrabel neck twitch when they traded A.J. Brown to the Eagles for the first-round pick that was on the clock, and they took Treylon Burks to be the A.J. Brown replacement at receiver, and what happened there. Puts a lot of pressure on the guy who ends up being selected with that pick that was acquired when Geno Smith goes out the door and when DK Metcalf leaves. So you got to get it right. You better get him ready, and you better hope he cashes in. And the good news is, and this is, I think, why teams are doing it, you take a veteran who had a high price and who wanted a lot more. I think the Geno Smith thing fell apart because the Seahawks found out Geno wanted $40 million a year per more, and they were at $30 million or thereabouts. Let's just go get somebody else. DK Metcalf wants big money. He gets big money. Seahawks never used him in a way to justify the big money. So it makes sense. You get guys cheap, but you got extra pressure on getting it right and getting these guys coached up and ready to go in their rookie seasons, not on the bench, not learning the ropes, not on IR, but on the field and contributing.
A few minutes left with Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, on a very busy Monday here in the National Football League world. The signings of Garrett at $40 million per, and DK at $33 million per. Let's take them one at a time. What's the ripple effect in that pond of the $40 million per contract for Myles Garrett? What's the ripple effect to the rest of the league, Mike?
There's two guys that bubble to the top when we consider the ripple effect of the Garrett deal. First of all, Duke Tobin, the Bengals director of player personnel, said at the Combine that Jamar Chase, their star receiver who won the Triple Crown this past year in catches, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, he will be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league.
Oh,
well, that number has gone up $5 million per year in the 2 weeks since Duke Tobin said it. So Chase is looking at a floor of 40 now. I think he's going to get midway between 40 and 50. I think he wants 50. He's not getting 50. I think 45 is becoming more realistic. And then there's Micah Parsons. Rich, look, your guys at NFL Network, there have been a couple of Sunday Splash reports suggesting that maybe the Cowboys will eventually decide to trade Parsons. Sean Sharif from 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, the Cowboys flagship station, he said last April, based on talking to 4 people in the building, Micah's act was wearing thin on the Cowboys. You just got to wonder, if Parsons' number starts creeping above $40 million a year, do they consider kind of a Herschel Walker trade? The problem nowadays, though, is what you get in trade and what they have to pay the player. That's tied together. So the more they have to pay the player, the less they're going to want to give you. But still, a trade is on the table, I think. It can't be out of the question until the Cowboys do a deal with Micah Parsons. And we know how the Cowboys like to do business. They drag their feet and drag their feet and drag their feet until the last minute. Meanwhile, the price for Parsons keeps going up and up and up.
You know, and then the question I have coming off of the contract for DK is going back to the Bengals. They've got 2 guys to re-sign. One they have on the franchise tag, so you kind of check the box with T. Higgins if you want to keep operating that way. But then you've got Jamar Chase, and then I guess Trey Hendrickson is another non-quarterback too. I don't know how these contracts don't make it damn near impossible for Joe Burrow to get what he wants, which is to re-sign everybody.
Well, and with Hendrickson, I think the Bengals gave him permission to seek a trade so he could find out he's not going to get Max Crosby money. I think the Max Crosby deal is the thing that was the catalyst for the Bengals to say, go see what's out there. And I think they're quietly optimistic that he'll find out there isn't a multi-year deal for a 30-year-old pass rusher, much more than what the Bengals are willing to pay. And I think that number's around $28 million a year, which is $12 million short of Myles Garrett, but $12 million more than what Hendrickson is due to make this year. And with Higgins, it's very simple. He's due to make $26.16 million this year, and he will be a free agent next year. They won't tag him a third time. So what will they have to offer to get Higgins to trade in that bird in the hand? 26 plus I go wherever I want next year at this time. It's going to be very hard for the Bengals to come up with a long-term deal that will get Higgins to trade in his right to get paid. Not great, but pretty good, and then become a free agent, especially if Jamar Chase is going to want $45 million a year. That's just too much money to put in the receiver position when you can go out and draft someone. The problem is they tried it last year with Jermaine Burton. That was a disaster. That's the risk of trading out a high-performing veteran for a rookie. No guarantee the rookie's going to pan out.
And we found out Josh Allen is registered for his wedding wherever he damn well pleases. What do you make of his new contract?
Well, this is one of the rare occasions where a team willingly tore up 4 years left on a contract, replaced it with a new 6-year deal, $330 million. It's $55 million per year from signing, which is the richest contract in NFL history. It was overdue. The contract he signed after 3 seasons was grossly obsolete. He was making $43 million per year. Publicly, he wasn't saying anything about it. Privately, the Bills knew they had to do something with it, and they did it. They gave him the reward that he deserves, 6 years, $330 million. And now, what does that mean for Patrick Mahomes? What does that mean for Joe Burrow? What does that mean for Lamar Jackson? They all pay attention to these deals, and when a big one happens, watch for Burrow to maybe get some sort of an adjustment, and especially Mahomes. He's got that ultra long-term deal, but they've been moving cash into the short term to give him cash flow. That's the key for quarterbacks. What's your 4-year cash flow? Allen now has the record at $220 million. Dak's got $219 million over 4 years. Mahomes and Burrow are going to want to pass the $220 million that Allen has. And Mahomes has the argument for it, because Mahomes is the guy that keeps Josh Allen and the Bills from going to the Super Bowl.
So I hear you on that front, but is there a cash issue for any team in the NFL right now where we're looking at lack of free agency movement or dragging feet on signing guys to incredibly rich contracts that we know they're going to have to sign them to, where there's a cash aspect of this behind the scenes that might explain some of the lack of moves or foot dragging? Mike?
Well, it's not a question of availability of cash. I mean, the Bills are on the hook for all of the overages at their new stadium, and the estimated price has gone from $1.4 billion to $2.2 billion. They're on the hook for that $800 million. They're finding the money to pay Josh Allen. You know, we hear these huge numbers, and I've seen the graphics, $1 billion in contracts awarded. The players get half of the money, which means the owners get the other half. And the owners have all of the equity. And we're seeing more and more teams shave off a few percent here, a few percent there, up to 10% for private equity. They're turning these gargantuan franchise values into cash. There isn't a cash issue as it relates to having it. The cash issue is related to spending it, because every dollar you save on players is one more dollar that goes into the super yacht maintenance fund. And these owners, as much as they like to say we want to win the Super Bowl, that's just part of what you have to say to get people to keep their wallets open to buy tickets and watch games, because they ultimately view wins and losses, I believe, based on the balance sheet. And it's Brewster's Millions, NFL version. It's impossible to lose money even if you try. But some of these owners are still cheap when it comes to players, and I think that can be an issue for some of these teams, like the Bengals and like the Cowboys.
All right, so then what's the move you're looking to see that few people are talking about before I let you go, Mike?
Yeah, that's a good question, which is always the thing that you say when you're trying to buy time to come up with an answer.
I thought
the quarterback carousel is what fascinates me.
I thought people are being complimentary when they say that to me, Mike. I didn't know that.
No. That's just I've learned not from using it. I've learned from people using it on me, because I know I never ask a good question. When I started doing interviews and people say that's a good question, it's like, no, it's not. You're just trying to buy time because you don't know what to say. I really do believe this quarterback carousel is fascinating. And before 2020, you never saw veteran starting quarterbacks become free agents. It was rare. Now every year there's the coaching carousel, then the quarterback carousel. And are there too many butts than seats this year? I think there might be. Jimmy Garoppolo's already decided to stay put with the Rams. Do you think he did that without exploring whether or not there's a team out there that would let him compete to start? I don't think so. It all goes into the reality that the tampering is rampant before noon Eastern on that first Monday of the negotiating window. So I want to see how this plays out. Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, all these veteran quarterbacks who are available, especially because the Browns need somebody, and the Browns need someone cheap. And I saw an article yesterday that implied that maybe, the headline at least, that maybe they were going to bring back Joe Flacco. I started working on that a little bit, and the name I heard for the Browns, and I'm sorry in advance, Cleveland fans, is Carson Wentz. Keep an eye on Carson Wentz to the Browns. And good luck convincing Myles Garrett that you've got a plan to win. All due respect to Carson Wentz, but come on. That isn't the centerpiece of a plan to compete for a championship. And now watch, Rich. This will be played back ad nauseum next February when the Browns are getting ready to play in the Super Bowl.
You never know, man. Thanks for the time, Mike, on a very busy day. Greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your phone buzzing. Get right back at it and look forward to seeing what you're putting out there on Pro Football Talk and all the TV and podcast shows that come from it. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, Rich. See you, buddy.
You got it. That's Mike Florio right here on The Rich Eisen Show. Catch The Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.